Hi, I'm Phil from Woodsmith, and we're getting back to my router table project here. I'm calling it a just right router table because it's just the right size for a small shop, which is what I have at home. Now, in the first video of this project, what we did is built the case here with some pretty cool tapered and curved legs on there just to give this a little bit of flair. The case of the router table is made from MDF and offers quite a bit of storage on the inside for all of your router gear. So you want to check out that video and the plans that go with it. In the second part of the video that we're getting started right now, we're going to focus on making the top for this router table and then also a pretty cool fence to go with it. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do is make some modifications to the plans. Now, one thing that wasn't included in the original plans was using a lift. Now, in a previous video, and you can check that out at the link, we made a shop-built router lift. So I have one of these, and I'm going to incorporate it into this router table. To go along with it, the original plans called for using a router insert plate. They're pretty common. I'm just not a real big fan of them. So what I'm going to do is go with just a single glued up top. So what I have over at the table saw, I cut 2 layers for the top. The first lower layer is 1-inch thick MDF, and that'll have a small recess in it to allow for the lift and the router to pass through. I'm going to cap that off with a 1/2-inch piece of MDF that I cut at the same size. So this is going to give me the overall thickness that matches the original project, but allows me to have a much cleaner, smoother surface, and that's what I like in router tables. Now we're going to cover this whole thing with plastic laminate, add a couple of slots for the fence, and then tackle that fence too, with a couple of modifications there. So all in all, what I want to do is cover the stuff that's in the plans, but then go into some details on how you can modify those plans to build a router table that works the way you want it to. So let's get started. All right, now the first step in the process of creating our top is to make an opening in the bottom layer. So what I've done is I marked center lines in both directions on the bottom side of our bottom layer here. So you can see the one center line here and the one here, and then use that to center the base over the top of it. Now temporarily I've just used a few screws here to hold the case in place, so that's one less thing for me to worry about. And then I've fit my router lift with the router motor in it to the inside of the case. And there's a reason for that, is that I want to be able to easily remove the router motor from the lift. Now, the way it looks here, it seems like it shouldn't be a big deal. However, in order to get everything in place here, I took the adjustment rod out, because that's going to fit into this hole here, which means I can't pull the router motor straight out the front. It'll have to go out the back. In order for that to work, I'm shifting the whole lift assembly over to one side so that I have enough space on this side to be able to get the router motor out. Follow all that? I hope so. Anyway, so what I'm doing here is using the lift to help describe the opening that I need to make in this bottom layer, because I want that opening to be as small as possible so that the top layer isn't likely to sag over time, since I'm using MDF here. So I traced the back edge and along the side, and then what I can do is just take a ruler here on the front edge, hold it in place, and trace that. So when I pull this out, you can see the rectangle here that is created by those markings. I'll make that just a little bit wider, but again, I'm trying to keep things as small as possible for the opening in this bottom layer. Now what I need to do, pull the case off here, and then we'll start cutting out that opening. All right, after laying out the shape of the cutout that I need to make in this section of the top, I want to remove as much waste as possible because I want this cutout to look halfway decent. So here's what I'm going to do. I have a 1-inch Forstner bit installed in the drill press, and I'm going to drill out pretty close to the corners of this opening that I need to make. Then we'll head back to the workbench where I'm going to use a jigsaw and just connect the dots and pull out all of that waste, and then it's time to clean up those edges. Once we have the waste removed with the jigsaw, I do want to clean up the edges, even though this part isn't going to be seen. It just has a cleaner look to it, and I'm just going to feel better about it. So how I'm going to do this is with a pattern bit that I've installed in a handheld router here, and I'm going to run that against a quick and easy template that I'm going to make. And that's just by using 2-inch strips of MDF. You can use whatever little scrap pieces that you have laying around, just so long as they're the same thickness. And then I've strategically placed double-sided tape around the outside, and then I can line those up with the layout lines that I drew in earlier and stick those down. And if I start on one side and start pinwheeling around with these strips, I have a really fast way of making a template practically any size that I need to without going to a lot of hassle to make it. With the opening complete, what I've done now is taken the lower layer of our top, clamped it to the thinner upper layer upside down here, and then I transferred my center line across onto that upper layer. Because what I want to do now is locate the various holes that I'm going to need to drill. I'll need 4 mounting holes for the router lift, and then we'll need a large hole in the middle for the router bit to pass through. So here's how we're going to do that. Once again, I have the router installed in the lift, just kind of loosely here. And I have a V-groove bit installed in the router so that it has a nice sharp point on it. That's going to create a little dimple where I need to drill that hole for the bit. Then for the mounting holes on the lift itself, I've installed dowel centers into those mounting holes, and they'll create dimples as well. What I want to make sure though here is that these uprights for the lift are perfectly parallel with each other. So I clamped a spacer here at the top that matches the side-to-side distance down on the bottom. So I'm going to take this whole contraption and flip it upside down. And I want this edge of the router lift tight up against the edge of the slot. And then I'm going to set it up so the bit is right on that center line. Then I can press down with the router, making a dimple there, and then press down on the top of the lift, making those dimples in the corners. And better yet, I can grab a mallet and really make sure that I have a clear mark to know where I need to drill those holes. All right, so you can see I have dimples here for those mounting holes, and there's one there for the center as well. Just so I don't lose track here, I'm just going to take a pencil, circle those, so when I head over to the drill press, I know exactly where I need to start looking in order to drill those. We're making discoveries here. I have the drill press set up to drill the pilot holes for attaching my router lift. Not a big deal. We'll complete those holes after we get the laminate installed on the opposite side once the top is all glued up. The issue here though is drilling the center hole. Now I'm going to use a 2-inch Forstner bit to drill that hole, and the reason I chose that size is one of my favorite bits to use at the router table for joinery is a slot cutting bit like this. I want to make sure that that will pass through that hole and the 2-inch size will work. It's going to be a little bit big for smaller router bits. However, I think I'll be able to make it work without any problem. However, because of the size of the top, as you see, I cannot reach the center because of how wide the top is. So what I'm going to do is I'll drill these 4 mounting holes, then we'll go back over to the bench, and then I'll just drill the router bit hole freehand, and I'm going to drill until that tip just barely pokes through on the bottom side, flip this whole thing over and complete it from the top. For those of you who weren't paying attention at home, what we've done to this part is drill the mounting holes for the router lift and the large hole here in the middle for the access for the bit to come through. What I want to do now is bring the two layers of the top together. So I have the top layer flipped upside down here on the bench, and I drew an outline of where that opening is because I don't need glue there. And I want to spread several generous swirlies of glue around the edge. And I have one of these notch spreaders you can get at hardware stores for spreading spackle and stuff like that. It works pretty well for glue, but it also really shows you how much more glue you need to apply. And as you can see here, I need to apply quite a bit more. All right, that's what I'm talking about. What we can do now is bring the other layer in place. And these are cut to an identical size. So take some time to line up your edges here. Now you're going to need probably every clamp in the shop here to get adequate clamping pressure all the way around. So I'm just going to start in the corners and then work your way around, adding as many clamps as you feel necessary. Here's the fun part for me, getting this top a lot closer to completion and what it's going to look like when we're all done here. So I have the top clamps are off, scraped off the glue that kind of oozed out from the sides, and I also went over to the table saw and cut a piece of plastic laminate, slightly oversized to the top because that's going to make aligning easier. Now to glue these together, I'm going to use spray contact cement. Now this stuff kind of looks like silly string when it comes out, but the way it works is that you apply a coat to both surfaces, to the substrate and to the laminate. Then you wait for them to dry to the touch, and then you bring them together. As soon as they contact, they're stuck down. So what I'm going to do is pick this up, and I can use the fact that it's bigger to kind of get it into position here, make sure that we're overhanging both edges. And then I'm going to stick it down in the middle. And then I have a J roller here because sometimes your J's are a little unruly and you got to roll them down. And we'll work from the inside to the edges. All right, there we go. Now I'm just going to quick grab a router, and then we can trim this flush and also the bit opening and move on to the next step. All right, the next operations that we're going to take care of on the top, now that we have it laminated, is to flip that top completely upside down so we can't see the laminate. And I'm going to start routing the grooves that are going to hold the fence in place and lock it down. So there's two grooves, or slots I guess we could call them, on each side here. And I've laid those out 2 inches in from the edge. And then I'm changing the plan a little bit here because it's my router table and not the plans. And I'm stopping the groove about 1.5 inches from the back edge. And then I'm going a little bit past the center line. And the reason is I have a couple of larger diameter router bits, like a slot cutter and a rabbiting bit. And if I want to set those for a light cut, that means moving the fence pretty far forward. And I've had on a couple of other router tables where that's just not possible. The fence kind of donks up against the stops, and then I need to put in some kind of spacer in order to be able to get that setting that I need. So I want to eliminate that problem right from the get-go. Now to create the slots, they're actually stepped. So there's a wider, shallow slot that goes in here, and that's going to hold a block that fits over one of these carriage bolts from the back side. And then there's a through slot that matches the shank of the carriage bolt, in this case 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to start with the wider one, and to make them I'm using a plunge router here that I've fitted with a 3/4 inch diameter bit. What I'm going to do is lower the bit so that it's just touching the workpiece. Now I'm going to take I have a setup bar here that's 1/4 of an inch thick, and I'm going to fit that on top of the stop, and then I'll drop the plunge rod on top of it and tighten it down. Now when I light up the router, plunge it down, I know that it's only going to go down 1/4 of an inch, and I have that same consistency. Just kind of keep an eye out where your start and stop marks are throughout this process. So I'm going to route one pass with the wider bit on both sides. Then I'm going to swap out for that smaller bit and do the through hole in a series of several passes. Okay, I have the slots for adjusting the fence taken care of, and I flipped it back in its regular orientation and installed a couple of screws just to hold it in place for this next step. What I want to do is ease these sharp corners because nobody wants to bump into those while you're in the middle of a project. I'm going to use a corner rounding jig. This one's by Craig Tools. It just fits right in place. It's got some non-stick or non-slip material on the bottom, so it's not going to shift around. And then in the front are these replaceable inserts that match the radius that I'm looking for. This one's a 1-inch radius. They just snap into little posts on the bottom of the jig. So you can see here just how much material is going to be removed. It's a little bit, but still something that we're going to do in a couple of passes. The set comes with a few other inserts in a variety of radii and in chamfer widths as well. So if you like that chamfered look, you can go with that too. Now for the router, I have a little palm router here, and I've installed a pattern bit with the bearing on top. That bearing is going to follow along the template while I make a few passes working up to it to nibble it away. Now the top is thick enough here that I can't do this all in one pass. So after getting the initial corner shaped, I'm going to pull the jig away and then finish it up just using the already routed corner as my guide to finish it up. All right, the next little bit that I'm going to add to this particular router table that's not on the original plans is this Freehand Guard that I picked up. This one's by Woodpeckers, and it has a couple of benefits. First, for those times when you're using a router bit and you're just using the bearing on the bit rather than the fence, having this in place forms a physical barrier to keep your fingers away from the spinning bit. The other thing that it does is it has a little dust collector attachment on the back, so I can stick the hose of my shop vac right in there and collect some of that dust and keep it from spewing all over the shop. Now it connects to the router table with threaded knobs that fit into threaded inserts that I've installed in the table. I have one here already, and I'm ready to install the second one. What I've done is drilled a pilot hole, 3/8 of an inch for this particular insert, and then I chamfered it to help keep it from pulling out or chipping as I'm installing the insert. Another thing to notice is that when I'm installing the insert for a cleaner look, I have the little tabs on the bottom of the insert facing down so that I have a smoother surface on the top. So I'm just going to set this in place, get it lined up, and clamp the jig down. And to get the insert started, kind of want to show it who's boss a little bit. And then I'm just going to use a socket to drive it down. All right, there we go. We have the insert driven in just a little bit below the surface so it's not going to catch on a workpiece. And now I can quickly and easily add that freehand guard. Another thing that I did was I quick buzzed a chamfer around the edge of the router table top, again, just to eliminate a sharp edge and to keep the laminate from chipping. The other thing I want to do is seal the edges of the MDF with a couple of coats of an oil-based finish and just protect that a little bit. From there, we're ready to move on to making the fence. Here's our router table taking shape, and you can see from the front with the doors off the asymmetric look here in order to be able to get my router in and out of that lift on the inside. Now what we're going to do next is focus on the top, and that starts by making the fence, and I have the blank here for the back of the fence. The fence is made in two parts. There's this main back piece that is what attaches to the router table and slides back and forth. There's going to be an auxiliary face across the front that the workpiece will slide on. It's also a great way to customize that face piece. So if you have really small bits, you can make an auxiliary face that has a really small opening. Same thing for larger bits where you don't want that for your just general purpose routing tasks. So what I have here is creating this stepped profile, and I have some rounded edges that echo the curved shape on the top. And what I did is I took one of those inserts from that corner rounding kit and used that to lay out the radii for the different sections on the fence. So what I want to do, I'm going to head over to the drill press to drill out those inside radii, and then we'll go to the bandsaw to cut everything out. All right, one of the best ways to cut an inside radius like we have on the fence here is to drill it out instead of trying to cut it. A nice Forstner bit gives you a really smooth transition between one edge and another. So what I can do here is I've set up the rip fence, and I'll make a straight in cut from each end, and then these upper shoulder cuts, and then round over the outside curves, and we'll tackle those at the bench just with a rasp and some sandpaper. After taking care of the shaping, the next work that we're going to do on the fence takes place here at the drill press. What I did is I drilled a hole on one end of the fence, and that's going to be used to secure it to the tabletop. Now, because of where the slots are, I didn't want to go by the measurements on the plans. I wanted to use the table top itself. So after drilling that, I attached it with a knob and a bolt, and then I was able to mark from the bottom side of the router table through the slot using a drill bit the location for where that other hole needs to be. Then with a square, just kind of wrapped it around for the top here. So then I can drill this hole. And then I'm going to swap out to a larger bit and then drill the bit access hole in this main part of the fence. This is going to be with a pretty big Forstner bit, so you want to dial down the speed when you take care of that. All right, after drilling out the bit access hole in the fence backer here, what I want to do is clean up this lower edge and create a large access hole. It doesn't have to be pretty here because there's going to be an auxiliary fence face that goes on there. I can clean that up with some file and sandpaper work there, and then it's ready for the fence face. Down here on the other end of the bench, I'm working on two other parts. To hold the router fence in place, I have these blocks that are sized to match the wider part of the slot that I routed a little while ago. Now these blocks hold carriage bolts, so I drilled a through hole and then used a chisel to square up the mortise so that it accepts the square part of the head on the carriage bolt. So when I fit that through, it's going to lock it in place and hold it steady. It's just that these blocks don't need to be that long, so I've set up a small miter box here on the vise, and then I can cut these two blocks to size. Okay, the last thing to do for the fence on our router table is to make an auxiliary face for it, because that's going to be the wear surface for the workpiece sliding past the bit. Now, the one that I have, I'm making it out of 1/2 inch MDF, and the reason that I'm using it is that it's relatively inexpensive, so it's not going to be too precious if it gets contacted with the bit and chewed up a little bit. The other thing is that if I want to, I can customize it to match a specific bit. Now, the auxiliary face is held in place by carriage bolts and a smaller version of the knob that we used to lock it down. Over at the drill press, I set up a stop to drill a counterbore hole. You'll drill a larger recess for the head of the carriage bolt and then swap out bits and put in the smaller bit for the through hole. That way you can just slide the carriage bolt into place, thread the knob on, and there you go, and you're ready to start routing. Now, it's also a good idea that when you're making this router table, make at least one more auxiliary face while you're at it and you have those stops set up on your drill press. Now, I have the second one here specifically with a much wider opening, and that's so I can use my slot cutting bit. You'll remember that that's much larger, and the reason that I went with a larger opening in the base itself. All right, this wraps up my router table project here. We're calling it the Just Right router table because unlike a lot of commercial router tables that are out there, this one has a smaller footprint and fits into smaller size workshops, which is exactly what I needed in my shop. I made a couple of modifications to the existing plans that were done by the Woodsmith creative director, Chris Fitch. I used on the inside a shop-made router lift. In order to do that, I shifted the opening of the bit so that it's a little off-center here. It's going to be perfect for what I need and get the job done. The router table also incorporates a power switch on this side to make it easy to turn the router on and off. I added some paint to it to match some of the other shop-made fixtures that I have in my own workshop. You can get the plans for the Just Right router table at woodsmithplans.com. Better yet, if you're a Woodsmith Unlimited subscriber, you get 6 free plan downloads each year. This can be one of those plans. Don't forget to check out the other videos in this series, as well as the other videos that you'll find on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching and happy routing.